morning. I see here a cup of coffee or a coffee cup here that says morning people are beautiful. I am not really the person you want to meet early in the morning normally. It's not my best time, but I will try to stay somehow focused here for a little while, for 20 minutes. As Andrea said, my name is Chris Torch. I've been working or living in Europe since 1975. I was born in the United States. The subject that I was given today to talk about is beyond. This was very difficult. But I began to speak about beyond what, or began to think about beyond what. So I start with, and just to introduce myself, because I think that the best way to meet someone is that when they tell you something about themselves. So I'm hoping that you will return the favor afterwards over a cup of coffee. Beyond my own limits. I was born in Cleveland, Ohio. This is my grandfather. He traveled at the age of 25 from Calabria in the south of Italy to the United States. Came off Ellis Island from the name Torquia. They cut his name to Torch. They put him on a train. They sent him to the coal mines in Charleston, West Virginia, where he spent a number of years, among other things, getting married with his wife, my grandmother, the woman on the right, 14 years old when she had her first child. This is my father and his twin brother. My father's name was Carl, his twin brother's name was Lenin. My grandfather left Mussolini's, the rising fascism of Mussolini. Beyond my own limits, Cleveland, Ohio. I knew already at the age of 11 that I had to leave Cleveland. In fact, I knew I had to leave it as quickly as possible, because I knew that nothing around me, the limits that I was put into, nothing around me would be able to stimulate me in the way that I understood that the world offered, but which I could not see. This was time before the internet, time before even really television functioning regularly. My images of the rest of the world outside of Cleveland, Ohio were very, very foggy. At the age of 6, my father, I lived in Little Italy in Cleveland, Ohio. I thought everyone was Italian. I understood later they were not Italian, they were Calabrese and Napolitani, because at that time, still most of the immigrants to the United States from Italy were coming from regions or cities and not from the country of Italy. At the age of 6, I got onto my bicycle and I decided to break my own limits. I was told always never to go outside of a certain number of blocks. I began to ride my bicycle, and suddenly I came around the corner and there were people with Afro-American haircuts and black faces. And I rushed on my bicycle back as quickly as possible. I said, Mom, pack the bags, we have to go, we're being invaded. At the age of 6. This was 4 blocks away from me, from Little Italy to the Afro-American neighborhood. This was my first step outside of my limits. I won't go through the rest of the story. We all have our childhood and our youth, but at a certain moment in my life, at the age of 20, I met these 2 people, Julian Beck and Judith Molina, the founders of the Living Theater in 1948. Judith died just 2 years ago. Julian died in 1984. And they taught me something about going not only beyond my own limits, but also about beyond others' limits. You know, we live kind of in a world where people want to put us in boxes. They want to keep us in some kind of comfortable zone for themselves primarily. And at a certain moment I met people that told me that you could go beyond the other's limits, because that would encourage them to go beyond their own limits. And so we began to perform theater throughout Europe. Of course, they had been performing for a long time. I had the great privilege of joining them. When I left the Living Theater, to make a long story short, I arrived in Sweden and I formed a company called Circus, Earth Circus. We formed in 1977. We began to travel in our bus. We played on the streets. We occupied 4 houses in the south side of Stockholm for the first time, an occupation of housing, which we kept for 1 year. It was finished in this way, carried out of the houses, together with 114 people that were living in the house at that time. And after that, I continued to work and live with these people, 14 people, 6 children. We lived from 1977 until 1991 together collectively with no salaries, sharing our responsibilities. We lived quite well. Beyond art, because others' limitations and my own limitations together, they create anyway a kind of zone. But then there is this beyond art. And there are 2 central questions, because to just make art for its own sake seemed somehow just a little bit weak for me. There was something about my 6-year-old experience on my bicycle of suddenly seeing something I had never seen and not understanding it that made me curious beyond just expressing myself, but also trying to find a communication with other people. 2 central questions for cultural action. With who? The Living Theater showed me, led me into experiences like this, where Julian Beck performing with the inmates at a psychiatric hospital. With who? Who do we want to communicate to? With whom do we want to have a dialogue? The second central question, where? The Living Theater showed me that it was possible to stand in front of people who had not asked for an artistic experience, but who were more than vulnerable to receive it. Beyond false borders. 25 years ago, we were promised something called globalization. We were promised that the world had become one, that we were not just Romanians or Swedes or Italians or Chinese, but that somehow we were interconnected. And my dear friend Dragan Klajic, a Serbian Jew, Hungarian background, unfortunately died much too early, a dear friend who wrote once, "Cultures do not dialogue with each other, they compete, clash, fight, interact, and mutually influence one another." This is a sculpture that was created for a project called Seas that we traveled with throughout the Black Sea, the North Sea, the Baltic Sea, and the Adriatic Sea regions, from coastal city to coastal city. And this statue, there were 7 of these sculptures called phantomats. The phantomats had in the eyes up there, wait, sorry. I knew I couldn't do this. There it is. Behind these eyes, one could press the button and you look in and you see a short 3-minute video. The videos were created by a director, a Kosovo Albanian from Skopje, and a Bulgarian sculptor who made the sculptures. There were 7 of these. They were put in a line, usually in a park or on a street, and you walked along them. And with the first one, you saw a short film. The second one, you saw a short film. When you came to the 7th one, this one, you looked into the eyes, and the artist, who is hiding behind the tree with a microphone, says suddenly to the person, "Hello, how are you?" And a conversation begins. This man is having a conversation with the phantomat. And the phantomat asks the visitor, the spectator, "How do I become a human being? What do I need to do to be a human being?" This is the story of Pinocchio. This is the story of the person who wants to understand how to go outside of the mechanical, beyond the biological, and into that which is the magic of the mixture of blood and muscle and sperm and life. So where are we today? you see the lessons? Do we see the threats? Do we see them? Environmental change. We are faced, of course, with a climate change that is disastrous, and which there are still people who call themselves our leaders, who tell us that this is not happening. We have the threat of reduced democratic participation, apathy. Less than 40% of the population in Europe bothered to vote in the European elections. I'm not a great fan of voting. I'm not sure that electoral democracy is the... I think that there is something beyond that. On the other hand, when people are no longer becoming active in their communities, in their societies, in the political processes that change our lives, we are in danger. We are in danger because of our increased fear. And the more we fear, the more we are in danger. And this is the fear of immigration, Islamophobia, a kind of cultural introversion, where instead of going beyond our limits, we accept our limits. We even love our limits. And as one great Italian anarchist once said, when you grow up with chains around your feet and you learn anyway how to walk, and someone comes to you and says, let's take those chains from your feet, you scream, no, no, because you have come to believe that the chains on your feet are that which makes it possible for you to walk. Shift of economic power. Europe is producing almost nothing. We are packaging, we are selling, we are buying, we are consuming, but our production has been moved to other places. This is what is called globalization. This is what is called globalization. Baku, Azerbaijan. Beyond hopelessness. Once we've seen all the threats, we somehow have to keep on trucking. So what is an appropriate cultural response? Intercultural competence. Intercultural competence is when I am standing in a circle and I see you, and you are the center, and you are the periphery, and this is foggy out here, but you are in the center, Mona, right here. This is the world for me. But suddenly something changes, and I need to pack up my bags and grab my photographs and put all my baggage on my shoulder and move over to another place in the circle, and here I stand, but I cannot stand the shift of my vision, so I continue to keep my body turned so that the world is still Mona, and the rest of you are peripheral. Intercultural competence is the capacity to leave the baggage, take a couple of essential photographs, put them in your pocket, and be prepared for another way of seeing. We could call this interlocal. I had a dear friend. His name was Manjai Njai. He was from Senegal. He was born in a small village called Guédiawaye, just outside of Dakar. Oh, sorry. Each other. It's okay, you can meet for a coffee later. Recreating a circle. My dear friend Manjai Njai, when he was 17 years old, he moved to Italy, and the reason for that was because he had decided he wanted to become a doctor so that he could open a hospital in his village in Senegal. And he went to his sheikh. He was a Muslim, practicing Muslim. He went to his sheikh in the village and he said to the sheikh, I'm going to Paris, I want your blessing. I want to learn to be a doctor. And the sheikh thought for a moment and touched Manjai on the head and said, Manjai, yes, you should travel, but you should go to Italy. Manjai said, Italy? I don't speak Italian, I speak French. I don't know anybody in Italy. What will I do in Italy? And the sheikh says, I don't know. But when you are 17 years old and you are from Senegal, you do not say no to your sheikh. So suddenly Manjai found himself walking along a beach outside of Ravenna, along the Adriatic coast, selling belts and lighters and souvenirs, and wondering what the hell he was doing on the east coast of Italy. At the same time, the director of the City Theatre, Marco Martinelli, from the City Theatre of Ravenna, born and raised in Ravenna, in Emilia-Romagna, 20 generations of Commedia dell'arte performers in his family, rooted. But he looks around in his city, Ravenna, and he sees black faces, many black faces. This is 25 years ago, and he starts to wonder, what's going on? What's happening to my city? So he decides, as the curious artist that he is, to go and find out. So he walks to the beach, and he walks along the beach, and he walks up to the first black face that he sees, and he says to him, "Excuse me, I hope I don't mean it as an insult, but could you tell me something? Why are you here?" And Manjai, who of course it was, remembers what his sheikh said and says, "In order to meet you." Marco and Manjai become close friends. Manjai becomes an actor in the theater, in the City Theatre of Ravenna. They bring together a number of other West African performers into the company, and it becomes Italy's first intercultural company, with 1/3 West Africans, 1/3 North Italians, and 1/3 Southern Italians, which is even more south than Africa. Manjai says to me this, that in Gedjavai, in his village in Senegal, when people gather together for a performance or for a wedding or to listen to music or to hear a griot, a storyteller, they gather in a circle in the central place, in the piazza of the town, and they gather dogs, old people, children, everyone in a big circle, and the performer steps into the center of the circle and begins to perform or dance or sing or play their drums. Now in this situation, if the audience likes it, they woo, and the performer continues to perform. But at a certain moment, you realize that you are not only watching the performer, but the set design of the performance are the faces of your neighbors, the eyes of your neighbors. You are watching not only the performer, but also watching those who watch the performer. And in this way, you are mirroring each other. You are reflecting on each other. Manjai said to me that at some point, somewhere, let's say in the 1600s, to make it easy, theatrical history, a king, a French king, came and decided to take this circle and divide it in half and turn it into 2 half circles, stage and audience. And here we are, all light on me. You hardly know if anyone else is in the room, because the light and the focus is on me. And this split, this breaking of the circle, reflected the transformation into a hierarchical, patriarchal society. Manjai says to me that our job as cultural workers, he calls himself an Afro-European, our job is to recreate the circle. To recreate the circle. And this is not an architectural question. This is a question of our relationship with our neighbors. Citizen, visitor. You know, it wasn't that long ago when culture was something we did in our neighborhoods, with our friends, with our families, with other people. When we traveled, we sang a song. When someone came to visit us, we cooked them dinner. And at a certain moment, and let's call it a historical parenthesis, there were created spaces for culture, a theater, a concert hall, a museum for modern art, a museum for archaeological art, a theater for musical and a theater for speaking, each one separate, each one put aside. Our limits are clear. If I watch football, I can watch football today, 24 hours a day. Sky Sport 1, Sky Sport 2, Sky Sport 4. It continues on. We can focus ourselves and put ourselves back into these boxes. The citizen visitor is the connection between being surprised and being rooted. So, one project, very simple project that we've done for the last 4.5 years called Corners. Corners is a European project. We were 13 different partners. I won't go into it all, but corners of Europe, at the corners and edges of Europe, this is where the most interesting things are happening. And we have found this through a number of expeditions to the Caucasus, to the north of Sweden and Norway, to the south, to the Balkans. We continue to find that at the edges, where conflict is still fresh, also culture is still alive. This is Nedjalko Delchev, a Bulgarian artist. He went one day when we went on these expeditions, we were going to the marketplaces, and the artists and the architects and the experts that were with us on the travels would arrive in the marketplace and begin to act, begin to break outside of the box. Nedjalko took this photograph that he had found in a flea market in Sofia, in Bulgaria. And he went around to the stands in the marketplace and he said to them, "This is my grandfather and grandmother. They emigrated from this village in Georgia where we were at that time. They emigrated, and I want to find out if there's any of my family still in this village. Can you help me? I only have this photograph and their last name." And he began, and after 1 hour, everyone in the marketplace was walking around with this photograph, showing it. "Do you know this person? I see the nose," checking, looking at Nedjalko, taking photographs of him. The entire marketplace was engaged with trying to find out who is Nedjalko's grandmother and grandfather. No one solved the problem while we were there for a few hours. We went back to the hotel. The next morning we got into the car or into the buses, and we were on our way to Azerbaijan. And suddenly we got a telephone call when we were about 15 minutes outside of the village. And the hotel said, "There's a truck outside waiting to pick up someone called Nedjalko." They had come, 14 people in a big pickup truck to pick him up because they had found out who was his grandfather and grandmother, and they came to get him to take him to a big party for the weekend with all of his former family. Nedjalko, of course, didn't know how to deal with this because, of course, it was a fiction. For him, for them, it was a reality, beyond reality. Nedjalko said, "Stop the bus." He got out, got into a taxi, drove back to the village, and spent 3 days with these people, continuing the fiction that he was their lost son. Stories heard on one street corner, they are retold on another. This was the basis of Corners. So what is the future of the European project? Is there a hope? Can we build a project instead of a steel and coal union, instead of a marketplace? Is it possible for us to find some ways of relating to each other which have to do with human development rather than economic development? To go somehow beyond ourselves. This is my hope. The great theater director Peter Brook, French or British French theater director, when he in the 1970s created his first intercultural company, a company made up of 15 actors from different cultures and countries. They had no common language, they had no common body language, they had no common narratives. And they began to work, and Peter Brook said that their intention was to create culture in the meaning that yogurt is culture. A small, invisible bacteria that transforms the milky substance of our society into something rich, tasty, and healthy. This idea of the microcosmos, of creating a bacteria that spreads and transforms around us, that we, in a small community here in Ambasada, here in Timișoara, a small team of people working in different neighborhoods, in different places, that this could become the bacteria that changes milk into yogurt. I'm really very, very much looking forward to working with all of you during the next few years to develop what I hope to be an immensely rich, healthy, and tasty cultural environment. Thank you.
slide, and this is the Q&A section, and Chris was kind enough to offer some extra minutes if you have any questions at all.
I know it wasn't the kind of presentation that actually involves questions. Yes, when I was 11 years old, I did go to school sometimes. Yes, I did get my driver's license at the age of 16. Yes, the car was the most important thing to me until just a few years ago when I realized that cars were killing us. But otherwise, any other thoughts or questions? So please, come on. You're welcome. It's a creative morning, please. Be creative.
There's a lot to process.
Cowards. Cowards. Be brave.
Well, I can start and actually use my icebreaker tag and use this very tacky and common question of what do you think influenced you in becoming an actor, a director, and a creative person all around?
Well, as I showed at the very beginning, my meeting with the Living Theatre was essential. But I actually had another moment of going beyond my limits. When I was a student and in the university, I was a sportsman. I was actually a wrestler, and this was the reason that I got to the university, because they paid for me to go to university, so it was possible for me to be there. And I found myself in my second year coming out from a very sweaty, hard training, and I walked, but just next to the gymnastic place where we trained was the theater of the university. And I was walking out and I was feeling a little bit depressed. I in fact had just lost a match, and I was thinking that this is not going to, I don't have a future as a wrestler. And I was walking past, and I walked inside the theater, and they were rehearsing a rock musical version of Peter Pan. And there was a bunch of people on the stage, and there was a rock band playing, and as I walked in, just 2 minutes after I was there, the band started having a fight, screaming at each other, and they were angry because they couldn't, I don't know, they didn't make the music right. As artists, you know how they are. And suddenly the drummer throws the sticks up in the air and walks out of the room and says, "Fuck you, I'm not coming back." He's out the door. And the band is standing there, the director is standing on the stage, the actors are standing on the stage, nobody knows what to do. It's like 3 days before the opening. And I hear the director call out, "Isn't there anybody in this damn place that can play the drums?" And I said, I can play the drums. I used to play a little bit in high school. And he said, "Come here." And I sat down behind the drums, and he said, "Do a solo." Or I did something, I don't remember what. And he said, "You're in. Let's go." And 3 days later, we were performing a rock musical, and I went to my wrestling coach, and I told him that I was no longer able to participate in the wrestling team because I had found something more interesting to do. So that was my inspiration. A drummer who got angry.
Thanks for sharing. That's a great story. Anyone else? Questions?
Yes. Would you say that following your intuition is the base of your success and your well-being now? And how did you, was there an internal fight that you were brave enough to follow your intuition during your life?
It's an interesting question, because I'm a believer in intuition, but I'm not a mystic. I think that a combination of clear and reasonable strategy together with intuition is what makes things work. Whether as an artist, or whether as an engineer, or as an architect, or even as a doctor, you have to have certain kinds of skills. You have to have a strategy. You have to know where you want to go. The question is not just what do I want, but also where do I want to be? And this question of beyond, which was what we started with, beyond just me. What is my function, if we can call it that? Because in some way we are biological animals. We are part of an evolutionary chain. We are put on this earth only to do one thing, and that is to improve the human race. To leave it better than it was when I came in. And it might be genetically, it might be by building something, it might be by leaving something, or it might be by simply just passing on interesting and challenges and discovery. Yes, there is a certain amount of intuition. But in order to be intuitive, you also have to really know what your strategy is, because otherwise intuition is just chaos. And there is a great difference between chaos and clear vulnerability. So yes, intuition is important. I have no idea really why. I mean, I had the great privilege of having parents that loved me, a brother and a sister who were, well, I hated them at that time, but who surrounded me with good energy, even though I was living in a quite frigid and restricted world in Cleveland, Ohio. I mean, I don't know how many of you have visited Little Italy in Cleveland, Ohio, but if you have, you would find that the limitations were very, very clear for all of us. And only those who didn't have a strategy to go beyond, were the ones who were satisfied where they were. I hope that most people in Cleveland are moving just a little bit more, but let us remember that 80% of the citizens of the United States of America don't even have passports. They've never traveled outside, and probably, I don't know what the percentage is today, but I remember reading that most people in the United States live and die within 100 kilometers of where they were born. This makes intuition difficult, because you really don't know what the possibilities are. So, travel.
Sorry, I suppose, my name is Kaios, I suppose you like Timișoara, no?
Seems that way.
I'm interested if you can tell us why you love Timișoara, or like Timișoara for now. Because I want to see my city with other eyes. I'm here for a long time, and I want to see it with your eyes, Timișoara, and how you're gonna see Timișoara after 5 years.
This is a beautiful question. Thank you. I don't know if I can answer it, but in 5 years I will try to answer it. You're absolutely right. Seeing something with other eyes is what it's about. It's both about love, it's about politics. If we don't see with other eyes, then we are stuck within our own little world and our own eyes. What do I see in Timișoara? I see a city that's really ready to flower. I see a city of the right size, not too big, not too small. I see a city with a great deal of diversity, even diversity that sometimes causes conflict. I see a city with lots of spaces, not only here at Ambasada and here in Paltem at the hat factory, but all over the place. Lots of places, lots of buildings which are looking for new functions. And I live and have lived in the last 38 years in Stockholm, Sweden, a city where there is nothing more to build. Every building has been used, transformed, sold, bought, speculated with. I like the idea that there is still something to build. I also find Timișoara to be in a very central geopolitical location, along the borders or close to the borders of Hungary and Serbia. In Western Romania, we are talking about a geopolitical situation which will define the future of Europe. The future of Europe is not in Berlin or in Paris, and certainly not in London any longer. The future of Europe is in Southeast and Central Europe. It is in the Caucasus. It is in the Baltic countries. It is at the edges. We are the ones that will decide if Europe holds together. It will implode. But will we give it a meaning? Because we have a need. Those at the edges have a need. Timișoara has a need. We need to be Europeans? Question mark? The one thing I miss in Timișoara is the sea.
We do.
The this is why we're working together with our friends from Plai here because of Mega Bega, you know, because what we want to do is take the Bega River and turn it into the Danube. And then from the Danube we can turn it even into another sea if we continue. But I hope that it's not because of climate change, but because of our mentality. I don't know if that answered your question. We can talk about it at any point. Certainly in the next 2 years. But I really, really appreciate the opportunity that was given to me when I was recruited to this job of Artistic Director for Timișoara in 2021. It's an incredible mandate to be allowed to see from the outside a city and to be so wonderfully received by the people here. That is not to be seen as a foreigner or as a colonialist or as an imposer or as an intervener in some way, but someone who from the outside can help us to find new eyes. And I'm sure that my experience here will help me to find new eyes. So yes, you're right. Let's look with through the eyes of someone who is a stranger. And I suppose after a few years I won't be a stranger. Maybe even I won't be able to do the speech in Romania that's important.
That's a promise.
That's a promise. Oh shit.
Now that you are the artistic director of Timișoara, right, and you have this job. First of all, have you ever encountered, or is it the first time that you're having this job?
It's the first time I have this job in Timișoara.
In Timișoara. So you have experience, right?
I have worked with European Capitals of Culture in the last years in any number, usually as an artistic director or creative director, not for the capital, but for a project within the capital.
Mm-hmm.
In 2013 and 2014, I worked together as a part of an artistic team to make the bid for Matera in Italy, which became the cultural capital in 2019. And then I was asked to work together with Rijeka, Croatia, a city that I knew very well. And I worked as program director, and we created the bid, which also won the cultural capital in 2020. So I was working as program director when Simone Neumann contacted me and asked if I could help to in the last stage of the bid process here in Timișoara. And during that work on that bid process, it became clear to me, and when I was asked, I was very, very honored to work here.
Because this goes to my next question then. Have you ever encountered city actually to help a city develop artistically, culturally, that doesn't want to help itself? Have you ever encountered actually a city so cynical that you have to and what would be the strategy of a cynic culture?
We'll give lunch as well. As long as.
First of all, I think a city is made up of many, many subcultures. And within every city, there are those who don't want to help itself, and there are those who desperately want to help. There are those who want to enforce. There are those who want to be passive and to just follow along. I think that Timișoara is no different than any other city that I've ever lived in or worked in that it has a multiplicity, a multiplexity of initiative, the right to initiative, or the capacity to take initiative. I don't think that Timișoara is an especially difficult place to work with, is my impression at this moment. I think that there is an immense amount of will and wish. There are also any number of challenges, and you know them better than I do. There are things that will block us, and there will people that will try to block us. But I have to say that I have never felt in all of my years of working with large-scale cultural projects, and some of them in connection to European Capitals of Culture, that the conditions for creating something truly new, truly different from other European capitals and cultural strategies as exist here in Timișoara, I have never seen. The conditions here are incredible for that, partly because of the leadership of the association, partly because of the geopolitical situation, as I said before, and partly because I think that Timișoarians are immensely locally patriotic. And probably because they are not so rooted. I've been told this idea of the transit city. that Timișoara is a transit city, but maybe there's something about transition, because I know as a migrant, and I know that many other migrants, no one is so loyal to their new place than the migrant. The people that were born and raised there, they take it for granted. But when I came to Sweden and I had to learn the childhood rhymes, the songs, the stories, the geography, the political history, I had to learn it. I had to take it in. I had to, like a sponge, I had to swallow it. And this is something that when you are born and raised in a place and you stay there, you take it, it's too easy. So I think that Timișoara, probably because of its migrational and transitional history, might have really, really excellent conditions for a special cultural capital.
Thank you, Chris. Can
Thank
we
you.
take one more?
Okay, thanks.
Just
It's your birthday.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's your birthday. Happy birthday to this guy. Huh?
So, I'm Maurice, and my birthday Creative Morning Timișoara question for you, Chris, is how many people do you need to create cultural awareness? Hundreds, thousands, or just a couple of enthusiasts is enough to start with? And on the other hand, does culture ages like people do? Thank you.
Culture ages, but it doesn't die like people do. How many people? You know, I've been immensely touched by a research that was done many, many years ago about rats. They did a study where they had rats, where they taught a rat, or one generation of rats, to do a labyrinth in order to come and find its cheese. So it had to find its way through the labyrinth. And it took, I don't know, say 7 minutes for the first rats to make this walk and to find the cheese. They found that the next generation, the children of these rats, could do it in 3 minutes. They found that the third generation could do it in 1 minute. That is, they were born with a capacity to already solve the problem. But then the interesting thing is that they found that rats born on the island of Japan, far away from where the original was made in generations, also had the capacity to make this labyrinth faster than the original ones. Meaning that there is some kind of transferal of knowledge that's going on among us, which is not purely genetic or biological, but something else. So when you ask me, Morris, how many people? One. Because in whatever time it's needed, the algorithmic multiplication to a critical mass goes very quickly. What seems to be very slow, and we have seen it in the negative way, in populism of our world today. We've seen suddenly people shift their mindsets. I mean, if you can imagine in a country of my mother country, of the United States, you know, to shift from 8 years ago Barack Obama to Donald Trump. These are the same people. These are the same human beings. So yes, the shift can go in both directions. The number of people that can crush us could also just be one. His name might be Erdogan or Putin, or it might be just an individual in a village someplace. But I also think that the transformation can be done by also a relatively small number of people, because it quickly grows.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.